Learners Engaged. My name is Mark Ritchie. I'm the founder and the partnership lead. We are a fairly new library agency, and our mission is very clear to help libraries engage, innovate, and grow. So today we're really excited to be exclusively launching Link into the library space here in North America. And really thrilled to have our speakers. They're both powerhouses in their space. So Dr. Audrey Barbakoff, she is the CEO of Collab Capacity, and she is a library journal mover and shaker, and also the author of 12 Steps to a Community-Led Library. So a true expert, and she really knows how to make library resources resonate within your community. And I am extremely excited to have an absolute legendary polyglot, Steve Kaufmann. He speaks more than 20 languages. He is world renowned. He has an incredible social media following of more than 1.5 million YouTube subscribers. Huge accomplishment. 100 million views plus on his videos. So really, he is the expert when it comes to language learning, and his approach is so unique. Really about authentic content. It's not just about textbook or memorization and phrases. So I'm so excited to hear Steve's perspectives today. We have Eric Roberts. He is the business development at Link, and he's going to be sharing with us the interface itself. But to get the session going, I am going to pass it ahead to Audrey and Steve. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mark. And I agree. It is so fantastic to be able to be here with Steve. That I want to kick us all off by just sharing that excitement and Steve learning a little bit more about you. So, for folks who might not be familiar with you or your YouTube channel, LingoSteve, or who might not be familiar with Link yet, tell us a little bit about yourself and your language learning philosophy, and how that shows up in Link.
Okay, well, I started Link about 20 some years ago with my son. Most of my career, so first 7 years or so, I was a Canadian diplomat. My first assignment with the Canadian Department of Industry, Trade and Commerce was to go to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin Chinese. So I learned Mandarin Chinese, but I also spent 3 years in France as a student. I did my university training in France. And then we lived in Japan. So I was exposed to a lot of languages. And I've always enjoyed the thing about language learning is once you realize that it's not sort of the deliberate effort to learn a bunch of rules. It's a matter of putting in enough time with the language that the brain gets used to it. Now I'll get into more details about how that works and how that inspired the Link system. But so then I eventually left the government, set up my own business. Well, I worked for some large BC based forest products exporting companies. Then I set up my own company, did a lot of business with Japan over the years and in Europe and so forth, and then learned languages. I wrote a book about that at a time when I spoke 9 languages, which was, when I was in my late 50s. But then since then, I've learned another 11 languages since the age of 60, mostly using Link. So that's kind of about me. And as along the way, then not only did we set up with my son the platform Link, but I started my YouTube channel, not knowing what to expect, some 20 years ago, and we've now got 1.5 million subscribers. So it's been quite a learning process. By the way, if the library patrons are, little older than 20, there is this perception that you can only learn a language if you're young. Let me assure you that that's not the case. My brain may very well be slowing down, but it doesn't prevent me from learning languages. Right now, I'm learning Persian and Arabic. And I'm learning. Maybe I would have learned them faster when I was 20, but I'm still learning and I'm 80. So, but insofar as the learning philosophy, I think there are two people, and I mentioned this in the little blurb that I sent Audrey, two people that you might want to become acquainted with. One is Stephen Krashen, who is well known in the United States, and he's had some controversial views on certain things, which I don't want to get into, but he has an ability to explain language acquisition in terms of, cutting to the essence, the Gordian knot of language acquisition. It's called input. You don't have the language within you. You have to bring the language in. So you need lots of comprehensible input. And the second person that I would mention is Geoffrey Hinton, who is a British Canadian AI expert, sometimes called the godfather of AI out of the University of Toronto. And he explains that when we learn things, and particularly as it applies to languages, we don't deliberately learn like discrete items that we place in a storage cabinet somewhere and go and collect them. Where's the word for, gato? We don't do that. That's not how the brain works. The
Mm.
brain develops an increasingly complex web of connections surrounding anything that we're learning, but in particular here, language, which gets weighted in different ways. And every time we engage with the language, we're kind of reconnecting and regenerating this whole complex web of connections. And the more you do it, the better your understanding of the language. It's much like AI, and the better your understanding of the language, then the better eventually you're able to produce the language. And so the ability to produce the language is very much dependent on your comprehension, very much because it's kind of a planning, it's a projection, it's the next word, as they say in the case of AI, right? So these two people certainly, I don't think they influenced how I learned because I started learning that way from the beginning with Mandarin, with Japanese, with Spanish, French, whatever. It was input, period. Don't worry about what you get wrong. Getting wrong is good. Every
Mm.
engagement with the language is good. All of that is increasing the complexity, the density of your web that you need to master the language. So it's compelling input. And that's why I'm not a great fan of the sort of gamified, identifying words you need for your next trip to Mexico. You'll never remember those words when you need them. You actually need to engage with the language, massive input through content that's of interest to you, hopefully, and that's not too difficult for you. And as you do that more and more, you develop a richer and richer sense of the language. And I'll just finish off. I've often dealt with immigrant groups here in Vancouver, and so you get Chinese parents who say, "Well, I don't want to really learn English that much, but I do need it when I talk to my kid's teacher, or if I'm stopped by a policeman." Well, you can't separate the two. You
Mm.
actually have to elevate the whole level of your language so that when you do engage with your teacher, or if you're stopped by, heaven forbid, stopped by a policeman for speeding, you have enough of a base in the language that you can react because you cannot anticipate what that person is going to say to you. You can't just
Mm.
isolate those few phrases that you might need in that situation. That's not how it works. So that's by way of introduction. I didn't want to talk too long, but I did. So there.
Not at all. Not at all. I find that that's so interesting and really compelling. Um I think as library staff, this is something we experience too, that when we serve folks who speak multiple different languages, and often there are one or two kind of dominant languages that we're seeing in the communities that we serve, we want to be able to kind of like, oh, I've got a few phrases in my pocket that I can use. And so on one hand, to hear that like that approach isn't going to work is, is disappointing. But it's also, it really resonates with just kind of how my own language learning experiences have felt, how I think we any of us who have, tried to learn another language have sort of experienced that you can try to drill, right? You can try to like do the class again and again, but it doesn't seem to stick until you have immersion. So that really resonates with me personally. So what I want to ask about now is like what that looks like in Link. So the product you've designed, we have an idea of your philosophy, your approach. It's about this comprehensible input. What does that look like in practice? So I want to learn, I want to learn Farsi and Arabic, and I go to Link. How might that look different? How might that philosophy show up?
Let me just say a couple of things. First of all, there's nothing wrong with having a few phrases because it shows respect for that person's language. So it's not going to get you to fluency, but it's always a good thing if you have patrons of a certain background, Tagalog speakers. If you say a few phrases in Tagalog, they're very, very appreciative. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. But if the goal is fluency, that's something different. I also wanted to say that I think libraries are a tremendous place in today's world where we're bombarded by all kinds of very often unsettling news, and we need to get to a certain level of digital literacy, and very often newcomers are perplexed. They don't understand how the local society functions. They may not be very literate, period, or they may not have digital literacy. And the library is a very safe place for them to get connected to the community, learn the things they need to know, improve their literacy in English, maybe explore other languages. So it's a fabulous place. So now, insofar as Link, so what we do at Link is I typically, if I look at my own language learning, I divide. So if I attack a new language, like, okay, Persian, for example, Farsi, the first 3 months are key. At first, the language is very strange to you. Now, that may not be the case for a, say, Spanish speaker who's been living in the United States and doesn't speak very well, but has been there for 3 years. I mean, they have a familiarity with English. They can read. All right. Which when I started into Persian or Arabic, I can't read. So, so the first 3 months at Link, we have what we call our mini stories. The basic principle is the same, listening and reading. And so you listen, you don't understand, then you read, and it might only be 3 minutes long or 1 minute long. Then you read the text. There are words that you don't know the meaning of. You click on them to see the meaning. You can hear them. You can go one sentence at a time, so you can hear that sentence in the natural voice. If you click on the individual word, it'll be a text-to-speech voice, but nowadays the quality of text-to-speech is so good that that's ample, good enough. And so you go through these mini stories. They are structured in such a way. I always say in language learning, we need repetition and we need novelty. So in the mini stories, there's lots of repetition. Each story has a different point of view. So we tell the story from the first person singular, or then the third person past, at different points of view with essentially the same vocabulary. And then we ask questions, and so the same vocabulary in slightly different forms, negative, positive, question, he, she, they, reappears. Okay, so you're getting that repetition with a slight bit of novelty, and then you go to the next story, the next story, the next story. So what I do is typically I'll go lesson one, I read it, I look up the words, and when I listen to it again, I still don't understand. And the biggest problem, I think, with people in language learning is you're not going to understand for a long time. And if I'm a person at a library helping people, I have to tell them, don't be anxious. Enjoy the process. Listen, try to hear the sounds. Can you hear where one word ends and the next word begins? And it's going to be a slow process. But stay the course and you will eventually get there. And picture me with Farsi or Arabic, where it's I can't read anything, I can't understand anything. Will I ever learn this? And of course, Arabic letters are different depending whether they're at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the word. And if you stay the course, you will. And part of it is encouraging and convincing people they will eventually get there. So with Link typically, so that's the process, and there's a bunch of statistics. Again, like Duolingo, we tell them how many words they've learned, maintain your streak, all that good stuff to nudge them to stay active, right? So we do those things, but unlike Duolingo, we do it based on meaningful content. So you're not learning phrases in isolation. You're also free to explore. Duolingo says you have to complete this before you can do whatever tree, I can't remember, but you can't do this next thing till you've completed this thing. We don't do that. You explore the language wherever you want. And at some point, and depending on the language, after 3 months, after 6 months, now you want to get something more interesting. And one of the features of Link is that literally all of the functionality that we have, which tells you which words you know, which words you don't know, which words you've seen before, all of that functionality and more will apply to anything you bring in. So typically I will, now with my Arabic, I will go to a Lebanese television station. They've got a program, a discussion on the politics of Lebanon right now, which is quite interesting. And I can click on a browser extension for Link, and it will automatically transcribe that television program. I now can open that in Link, go through it sentence by sentence. I can see the television screen with these people talking to each other. I can see the script, what they said. I can look up words and stuff. So the progression is initially you have very easy content, our mini stories, or other beginner content that you can either bring in or that you find in our library. We have a vast library in every language, 50 plus languages. But then eventually the goal is to progress to where you can bring things in. So it might be a telenovela if you're learning Spanish. If you are an immigrant into, say, the United States, and there's a discussion on something that relates to your professional activity or whatever, you can bring it in. If it's audio, you can bring it in. If it's text, it doesn't matter. And so you then start to learn from things that are relevant to your working experience or to your interests. And so the thing with Link is that there is no limit. It's not like Duolingo has packaged a bunch of phrases which they think you want to know and which you will forget in any case because you can't in isolation deliberately learn them. But with Link, there's no limit. You can bring in, you know, the latest, if you want to, I don't know, a television program, whatever you want. So yeah, that's just to kick things off. That's how Link works.
I love that. And to me, that really resonates with how libraries think about and promote and share learning in that it's all about interest, right?
Hmm.
I think we see this most often, most clearly with how we serve youth, but it's true for adults as well, that we're not so interested in, right? What is your kind of reading level or what is your grade or what is, what should, quote unquote, you be reading at this
Hmm.
moment in your life? Um, we're about connecting people with what interests them and what they
Hmm.
care about. And it makes so much sense to approach language learning in the same way, that it's not just about the sort of rote memorization. It's about we learn better when we have that mental framework of things we already know and care about and are interested in to kind of hang the new knowledge on. And we're
Hmm.
more motivated because it's stuff we care about. So that to me, that is so in line with just kind of the library ethos of
Hmm.
interest driven learning. So I really love that.
And the other thing too is that, people think that language learning is a straight line. You learn the basics and you've nailed them down, then you go to the next step and the next step. Well, that's not true. You never nail the basics. You continue to make mistakes in the basics. And also, even if you progress to more demanding and difficult and inherently interesting material, it's still a good idea to go back to the beginning lessons and to the mini stories and listen to them again. So you're constantly going back and forth between challenging, more interesting material where you are harvesting new words and phrases, but then you want to go back to the easy stuff again to work on your fluency and to discover all the things that you missed on your first pass through those easy things. So it's not a straight line. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that too. I mean, it's so easy to get discouraged when learning any new thing, but especially something as complex as a language. It's so easy to get discouraged when it seems like, oh, I'm not ticking all the boxes right away. So that's just really encouraging, I think, for us, and hopefully something we can share with our patrons. That
Hmm.
I think, as you said earlier, like every exposure to the language is a good thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a few different audiences for
Okay.
Link. Talked about you've talked about newcomers, immigrants, folks who might be learning English. You've talked about a little bit about people who speak English and might want to learn other languages. So can you talk a little bit about the audience for Link? Like who is it built for and who might benefit from using it through their library?
I would say right now, okay, in terms of age, there's no limit. We have, early teens, not so much, but late teens right through to my age. Okay, so there's no age limit there. Uh, it is true that people who are not so literate in their own language don't do as well at Link. People who are not, literate with digital literacy, use of the computer. On the other hand, those are precisely the people so the people who come to Link, they come on their own. No one is holding their hand. The role of the library, where I see libraries, is a lot of people who would not make it on their own, who would be discouraged, who wouldn't be able to understand what to do, and who would give up and get frustrated. If the libraries can provide a helping hand to those people, in terms of learning and also in terms of feeling better connected to the community where they live, that to me is the role of the library. So Link out there in the stratosphere for everybody who happens to stumble onto Link, there's a percentage of people who understand it and stay with it. That percentage would be higher in a library environment if they get help. And and particularly if you have an immigrant, like one thing I should say, Link is free for all refugees. So if you have a refugee from
Mm,
wherever, they use Link free. They just have to identify themselves. And okay, if the refugee is not very literate, it's difficult. But if people at libraries who are working with literacy can bring Link in as a tool for literacy and gradually increase the digital literacy of these people, there's a triple payback.
mm,
So I think the model with libraries might be slightly different than the model we have just on the web, right? Where we're dealing with people we don't know. anonymous people of different levels of, education. But the people who find Link now and stay with it are typically people who are literate in their own language.
Mhm. What really strikes me about what you said is the importance of humans, right? Is the
Mhm.
importance of that personal connection. And again, in libraries, that's something that I think is so important for us. And especially when we think about digital resources, it's easy to sort of think of that as like, well, that just lives out there in the ether, right? As separate from the people. But we know in libraries, right, that the when our online resources get used the most is when we have that human connection, when we're making that warm referral, when we're scaffolding people with a digital literacy and access and resources that they need to be able to find and use those things. So I love that even though, what you're talking about ultimately is a digital product, the entree to that is really so human. And that again is I think is so deeply library.
Well, and one other thing I feel like if I'm reading something,
Hmm.
to be able to have a real book
Hmm.
is very comforting. So
Mm.
digital is all over the place. It's handy. You can look up words and stuff, and I will often attack a foreign language in, the digital format because I can look words up. I can use link and stuff. But when I get to a certain level, if I can find an actual paper book copy of that, I will also read that. In other words, to cover the same material, the way the brain works, if you can cover the same material in different ways,
Mm.
so a different author writing on the same theme of history of Iran or whatever, or some digital, some audiobook, some paper book, all these things enrich our interaction with the language. So the traditional book in the library, which you're surrounded by, right? So it's rich, right? That's another attraction of the library. So bring the people into the library. It's a place where they can connect with the community. They can access all this stuff online, but by accessing it online and perhaps starting to feel a little more confident, then they'll come in and maybe grab the actual book and record it, or at least to borrow it or read it in the library. So lots of different ways.
Mm. Yeah, it's really just woven into that whole ecosystem of resources and
Mhm.
support. It's a really compelling vision. So you've talked a little bit too about technology. So I
Right.
want to dig into that a little bit more and how kind of all this relates to technology, as we know that it's had a huge effect on language, on
Mhm.
communication generally, whether that's from YouTube videos like yours or things, interactive tools like Duolingo. There's the impact of AI, which you've referenced. So what do you see as the role that technology really plays in language learning now?
So, it used to be that language learning was a textbook. The language, like the teacher had the language and the teacher doled out the language to you. The
Mm.
teacher decided what the textbook was going to be. The teacher decided what we're going to learn today. The assumption is if the teacher teaches you something and tests you on it, and if you get 8 out of 10, that you've learned that, which of course isn't the case. So that's the traditional model. We now have a model because of the internet. We have access to, I mean, I remember I was asked to give money to a local college for their language lab. They wanted me to contribute to this language lab. A language lab is compared to what I have in my iPhone. There was no language lab 30 years ago that had the range of audio and text material in the number of languages that I have on my iPhone today. I can just what okay, so I can access MTV Lebanon. I can access a television station in Lebanon, watch it on my screen, automatically download it as a lesson to link, transcribed, ready to learn. And I can look up the words. And if I'm learning Spanish and I choose a verb, it'll conjugate it for me. It'll tell me what part of speech it is. All of this stuff is happening. Or, for example, AI at Link, if I look up a word where there could be 3 or 4 potential meanings, AI will tell me the context relevant meaning of that word for this particular sentence. That's all AI, right? If I, let's say, if I grab a digital or some kind of text on a subject, I can take the URL or a YouTube video, and I can take the URL and I can put it into Notebook LM, and I can say, create for me a discussion, 10 minutes long in French Canadian French accent on this subject. And in no time, I wouldn't say in no time, like it'll create it, but then I have to convert that into an audio actual discussion. But I have a tailored content item, audio and text, that I can mine now for words and phrases. And if it's in the accent that I'm interested in, it might be Ecuadorian Spanish. I can listen to that over and over. The ability to sort of refine the kind of content that you want to learn from. Okay. Now, there are people who like to talk to an AI. I don't do that, but some people, because I would rather have one session a week with my online tutor, a real life person whom I want to show what I've achieved. So I don't want to talk to a bot, but a lot of people do. And a lot of people are maybe a little intimidated. Plus, it's cheaper. So AI enables you to have a conversation. I can go to AI and say, create me, give me 10 examples of the subjunctive in Spanish. Create a story for me about what the ability to ask the AI to generate content, which you then subsequently can import into Link, or and the quality of automatic or text to speech audio today is so high that in many cases it's easier to listen to as a learner than natural conversation because it's more even. The
Mhm.
intonation is more even. So those are
Mhm.
some of the examples. I'm sure I could think of more, but AI, all of these things don't substitute for language learning. They enhance our ability to learn languages.
Mm. I think that's really key framing to treat the technology as the tool, as
Mhm.
support, rather than kind of attempting to outsource our brains and say
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I don't need to do this, or I don't need to engage in this kind of critical thinking and lifelong learning." Instead, to say, "How can these tools be used to enhance my ability to learn?"
I mean, if you're an immigrant to the United States, you don't want to go around with your iPhone and speak Spanish to your phone and have the telephone spit out the English. You want to be able to, I mean, the kind of human interaction that represents is not very motivating. So yeah, we're going to learn languages better and faster with the technology that's come our way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So you talked a little bit about the founding, the creation of Link.
Mhm.
Um, but you are a very interesting person. There's even more to the story than you briefly shared. So give us a behind the scenes peek. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this how this idea evolved?
Yeah, I think there were two things really. One was that I had books at home back in the mid 80s in German and Spanish, full of words that I didn't understand. And every so often I'd have another crack at it, and I would underline the words that I didn't know and I would look them up in a dictionary. And of course, I immediately forget whatever I looked up in the dictionary. And we mustn't underestimate our ability to forget. Forget is what we do. So I always thought there must be a better way. And then with the advent, first of all, of MP3 technology and digital text, I realized that if you combine MP3 technology, which now makes the audio so portable. Back in the late 60s when I was learning Chinese in Hong Kong, I had a great big open reel tape recorder. That was
Mm,
the technology. Nothing was portable, right? So with MP3 technology and digital text, the opportunities just explode. Now, what happened in whenever it was, now I can't remember exactly, but I was learning Cantonese at the time. I decided to work on Cantonese. I had learned Mandarin, had learned Cantonese. I was listening to a local Cantonese radio station here in Vancouver. And a recent immigrant from China had all his money stolen at the airport. He arrived.
mm,
Apparently, there are gangs that prey on these unwitting immigrants who have all their money in a bag and sitting there on their, baggage cart. So I phoned the television station. I said, "Look, we at that time we were building, ERP systems for sawmills because my main business was in the wood business." And I said, and he was an IT guy. I said, "Well, we'll give him a bit of a break here. We'll hire him. If he's good, he stays. If he's not good, at least we helped him out for a few months." So he came along, and what I discovered was that there were a lot of people who theoretically had a high level of English. In other words, they'd passed TOEFL,
mhm,
but they didn't really understand. They didn't understand how the society worked. They didn't really communicate. They had some kind of a theoretical pass the test level of English, but they weren't able to really integrate. And if you're working in an office, like if you're working in a factory, maybe that's good enough. But if you're working in an office, you have to interact with people. It has to be smooth. You have to understand what is said and what is not said. And so this guy didn't have it. So we designed the system, the sort of precursor of Link, with him in mind. And it was
Mhm.
initially just for immigrants. And I had a lot of interaction with immigrants in Vancouver, largely from China, and the problems they had, and most of which related to this problem that they don't understand the culture. The language skills are poor, culture skills are poor. Obviously, they don't have good connections in the society, so there are a lot of obstacles. And so we said we got to develop a system that enables them to learn words and phrases and become familiar with our society by reading and listening to content that's relevant to them and of interest to them. So that was kind of the beginning of Link, and eventually we expanded it to a multi-language platform. That's kind of over the years how it's evolved.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Um, and something that I mean, aside from just like what what a wonderful human you clearly are. Um,
It really
that
is.
is that is the thing that really strikes me. You're very modest about it. You're like, well, so I just called up the TV station and offered this guy a job. I think that is not would not have been everyone's first instinct. But beyond that, that it's designed with a real human in mind, a real specific
Mhm.
person, and then grew from there. It didn't develop in a vacuum. It didn't develop just as a theory. Um, that's I think very that speaks to the relevance, right, of it for folks. And I love that you're going kind of beyond learning language and into learning to communicate, right?
Mhm.
It's not just about do I have the words, can I pass the test? It's about do I understand what's going on around me in the world and can I participate in it and express myself in it? And that I think is something that we're not often necessarily thinking about early on, right? When we're like, well, I want to learn such and such a language for whatever reason. So the way that you're bringing kind of cultural knowledge and awareness through storytelling, through that comprehensible input, I think that's something really powerful that I'm not personally seeing in a lot of other language learning spaces.
I'll give you an example for Persian. We had a teacher who was originally in Iran and now lives in France. She created a 26 episode series on the history of Iran. The same model as we use with what we call circling questions. So through learning Persian, Farsi, I became more and more familiar with Iran. And she was an amazing, resource like food from Iran, carpet, stuff like that. And I think that, a library, and each community is different, the sort of origins of the different of people, and whether you live in, I don't know, Austin, Texas or Cincinnati, Ohio, it's a different environment. But libraries can create nowadays. They can just ask AI to create something that's relevant, culturally relevant to the community that if they're newcomers, that they have come to or catered to their interests. The opportunity to create meaningful content, compelling content at the level of the learner that learners can learn from, as opposed to the old textbook. The problem with the old textbook is behind each chapter would be a list of words to learn. Fundamental flaw is whoever wrote the textbooks assumes that they know which words you know and which words you don't know. And of course, that's not true. Very often, words on the list you already know. The words that you came across in the text, they don't have them on their list. Besides which, they don't repeat that vocabulary list in the subsequent lessons. So that again, on Link, if you look something up in one of our stories, and it was originally highlighted in blue, it's now highlighted in yellow. So if it shows up 3 or 4 chapters later on, you'll see that you'll see it again. You can look it up again because you'll have forgotten it. Well, whatever was on the vocab list in lesson 1, you'll have forgotten by lesson 3. So you can see that you learned it before. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's so much better than the traditional textbook approach.
Mhm.
Thanks to technology. Thanks to technology.
So I'm interested in the origin of the stories now, because you mentioned that the person who created some of this for your content in Farsi or Arabic or on Iran. Um, like this is a real person who actually comes from that culture and lives in that part of the world. So how the sort of the beginner level stories that we're seeing in any language, how are those developed? Where do those come from?
So, we live in this strange world. So I went to a website called Upwork and I
Okay.
said, I'm looking for someone who can create stories, easy English, initially, English, around very simple everyday life type themes. So, one of the people who put forward their resume and who actually gave a sample story and who was good was actually an English teacher in Japan. Turns out she
Mhm.
was a Canadian. Well, she started producing these stories. So, and then we decided we will just simply translate, slightly localized, translate these stories into the other languages. So we have 60 mini stories parallel in more than 50 languages. So maybe it's tea rather than coffee, but it's everyday life.
Mhm.
And so those are the mini stories. And you can say there's a progression, there's a slight progression, like at least in English, we only, in the first 20, it's only in the present tense. But in some languages, it's just there's a gradual, you jump into the language in midstream. But because there is no obvious, even if I buy a language like Teach Yourself or one of the language learning textbooks, and chapter one shows Mr. and Mrs. Smith's, or it's like arrive at Milano airport. It's not that easy, actually. It's not that easy. So there's no big difference. You actually have to get in and get wet. And so, but if you provide enough repetition, and if you provide the audio, and you provide, the ability to look up the words, and you can go through it sentence by sentence, and you can go back when you forgot something, all of that makes a lot of stuff very accessible. So the mini stories were produced in English, and but we are now trying to generate more of that kind of content. But in the case of Farsi, so I did the mini stories, and then I felt confident enough that I wanted to go to something that there's BBC Persian, there's all kinds of stuff that I'm now using. There's excellent quality Persian podcasts that I can find and that I use. But very often in language learning, it's that intermediate stage between the beginning, the mini stories, and before you can really access the difficult stuff. And that's where, this tutor that I had, she produced a variety of material in sort of an intermediate level of difficulty, but yet still interesting.
Mhm.
Children's stories are not interesting other than to children. So you've got to have some kind of intermediate stuff that's of interest.
Fantastic. As someone who writes children's stories, I will disagree with you on that point.
Okay,
But
all right. No, I shouldn't say that. I should say that different people are interested in different things.
but the point, yes, and the point is well taken that there needs to be something between kind of like the pen is on the table
Right,
and following a complex geopolitical thing going on in
right,
the news, right? That it is that middle where we get discouraged or we feel like we plateau or we kind of
right. Besides which, the problem with children's stories is children's stories are not easy. Because you
there
no,
we go.
because
True.
if I'm interested in politics or history, I have domain knowledge. I know the
Yeah.
subject matter. If you're writing a children's story full of fantasy and animals and trees and stuff, I have no familiarity with that background, and therefore it's
Yep.
not necessarily easier.
It's very true. There's a lot that's implied. So
Yeah.
needing to make sure that if people are if you as you're having people learn cultural expectations at the same time as they're kind of learning the language, they can connect them. Having all of that assumption in the background is challenging. So there's clearly a lot of thought that goes into how these stories are developed and how they both meet kind of that technical like language learning, like you said, all present tense in the beginning kinds of things, but then also being interesting for real people and who have
Right.
we're not all interested in the same things as each other. So that's really fascinating. So as we start to approach the end of our time, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience shortly. So for those of you who want to take this incredible opportunity to ask Steve some questions, please formulate those now. You're welcome to use the hand raise feature or pop something in the chat or just unmute if you need to. But before I turn it over to that, I just want to ask you, Steve, is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't? Is there anything else that you think that libraries want to know or would benefit from knowing about language learning or about Link that we haven't had a chance to really dive into?
No, I mean, in preparation for this meeting, again, AI. So I went to Perplexity and I asked, what is the role of libraries today? What are libraries concerned with? And so forth and so on. And it made me realize the extent to which a library is an important meeting place. It is a
Mm,
meeting place. And particularly today, where it seems we don't meet as much, we seem to be constantly looking at our iPhones or whatever, and people are disconnected. And yet people want to connect. They want to connect in cafes, and I think they want to connect in libraries. So I think the opportunity for libraries, whether it be for, you know, the average citizen to learn a foreign language, to engage with other content, even such things as basic literacy, like the role of libraries is potentially tremendous. And so, yeah, we would be very excited if there are opportunities for Link to be used in libraries in some way.
it's fantastic. Well, certainly, having had this wonderful opportunity to learn from you today, I've just heard so many threads that to me really feel deeply aligned with the approach that libraries take to learning and to community building and to welcoming people into our communities. Um, and certainly libraries have a long history of supporting language learning, as well as the kind of cultural learning and integration to help support people when they come new into a community, as well as the many folks that we support who are just lifelong learners and want to, who are English
Congratulations.
speakers or local language speakers, but want to learn a new language, whether that's for personal interest, whether that's for business, right? Whether that's whether that's for family, or travel. So I see so much synergy between what you're offering and the approach that libraries take to building community and to lifelong learning. So with that, I want to open it up to two questions from the group. And I see one in the chat now, which is Link working with any libraries right now?
So I'm not the best person to answer because I'm not involved in that. Perhaps Mark, you would have more information. Or,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Great question. Yes, Link is working with several library systems throughout the US and Canada currently. We have just launched the library market, and there has been interest from several consortium groups, and there has been libraries. I know San Luis Obispo in California is using it. We have some libraries in Colorado with Click Consortium. And so there has been some initial movement and lots of great interest. And we know that there is a monopoly very much in the library space, and a methodology that Link is bringing is obviously very unique. Um, and so yeah, we're really excited to have to continue growing and working with Link to bring this method of comprehensible input into the library space. Um, I would I have one question for Steve, but I would like Eric to come on beforehand and just to give us a quick, 4 or 5 minute walkthrough of the platform. And then I want to jump in and ask Steve one question about mixed families and how
Mm,
Link can support families with children, because this is a problem, a challenge that I have. My wife is Japanese, born in Canada here, but we would love to get our kids learning Japanese, and we fell off the rails when COVID came around. So, but Eric, if you wouldn't mind, just jump on really quick, and then we can jump into the question about mixed families and how Link can support that.
Yeah, sure thing. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen here. And everyone should be able to see my link screen, I'm hoping.
We can indeed, yes.
Okay, great. So this is just a quick overview of how Link works. It is available on the web and on mobile. I'm going to be obviously doing this on the web. And in this case, I'm just going to pretend I'm learning Spanish, and my native language obviously is English. So that's the scenario I've made for myself. Now, I want to mention one thing too, is because I'm already using Link, I'm not going through the onboarding process. anytime a new patron or user of Link signs up for the first time, they will actually be guided for the first steps on what to use, how to use a feature, what the feature means, and so on and so forth, just to help them get used to the platform. Because as Steve said earlier, unlike a lot of other platforms that are kind of constrained, Link is essentially limitless in what it offers, and it allows the user to choose their own path. But we do have a guided onboarding process. Now, you can see here, these are the shelves. Similar to Netflix, we have different types of shelves or different genres, you can say. You can see there's the news feed here, TV shows, Netflix shows. And again, these are just from other websites that you can pull in from Link. YouTube is probably the #1 resource for language learning, and that is compatible with Link. You can import videos, import the text, and you can see there's things for kids, business, entertainment, and so forth. Now, as I am starting off in a new language, Steve mentioned the mini stories, and that's something that we encourage other language learners to start off with if they're beginners. In this case, here are the mini stories. You can see each language that we offer, which is over 50, and you can see the languages here. Each one comes with 60 mini stories. And again, these stories are great because they use common vocabulary, they're repetitive, and they also have natural sounding audio. What's really great about Link, again, it's a content machine essentially, and not only do we have 60 mini stories in Spanish, we also have mini stories using different accents, Mexico, Colombia, etc. So I'm just going to click on one of the mini stories here. Let's call it number 3. And what happens when I open a lesson, I get taken to the Link reader. I'm going to just change the background so it's easier to see. So this is the Link reader. And you can see there's 3 different highlights. There's no highlight for some words, there's a yellow highlight for some words, and then there's blue. Essentially what this means is it's just a way to track the words you know, the words you're learning, and the words that you've never seen before. Why this is helpful? It just gives you almost a quick bird's eye view of how you're progressing in the language. Again, the more words you know, the highlights disappear. The goal is to essentially make your whole page eventually have no highlights. So as I come across words in Link I don't know, I'm just going to click them. A dictionary will pop up, and I will choose one of the meanings. I can also listen to how the meaning sounds by just clicking this speaker icon. Contenta. I'm not sure if you're able to hear that. Hopefully you were. But as Steve mentioned, with the updates in that technology, the text-to-speech has improved dramatically. And again, all I'm doing as I'm reading is I'm just looking up words and getting familiar with the meanings. I'm not trying to memorize words. I'm just getting used to the language because that's how language acquisition works. It's not about memorization. It's just about flooding your brain with vocabulary, listening and reading to words as you go along a variety of content. And again, full audio for each lesson, which is great because I can click on the audio here.
Esta es la historia de Karen.
And I can listen to the story and how the words are pronounced and just, again, get used to the language. Link has a lot of features that are helpful in all aspects of reading online, digital reading. For example, sentence mode, which is really useful. I can go sentence by sentence, and I can translate the whole sentence as well. And page view, as you can see here. And again, as I get used to the words, I can go through each lesson, and I can see my known words, which are words that I can mark with a check mark here, and you see the highlight disappears. My known word vocabulary count will grow, and that's actually quite meaningful. Personally, as a Link user, that's the most meaningful stat for me, and that just gives me a good idea of how well I am, how well I know the language. So that's a mini story, an example of one mini story in LingQ using the reader. Now, as I progress, or if I'm already an intermediate learner, again, I can choose from content within the library that I'm interested in. But what makes LingQ stand out is its ability to import content into the library, your own LingQ library. So here's an example. If I go up to the top here, I'm going to just click on, here's a news article from the BBC in Spanish. Now, again, I might be able to read some of this, but I would like the ability to look up words, save them to my LingQ library, vocabulary, and just have a more a better flow just to read and listen to this article. So what I can do is, after I download the LingQ extension, which is available across all major browsers, I just click on the import button. And once I do that, that content will now become a lesson into my LingQ account. This is the same article. And again, when I open it, here it is, easy to read or easier to read just based on the ability to look up words. I can actually generate the audio using text-to-speech technology. And again, I can listen to how the words are pronounced. Aportar. And I'm just going through this lesson as I would any other lesson. And it's not just articles from websites, news articles from news websites. It can be actually YouTube. Here's a video on YouTube. And this is, I would say, more of a beginner-friendly YouTube video. Now, watching this, of course, I get the input already with listening, but if I want to read the text as well, I do the same thing. I just click on the import button, and this YouTube video will now become a lesson in LingQ. And here's the script.
Eric, I want to pop in a question.
So I can go through the lesson again, watching the video as well as looking up words and just really nailing down some of the minor details that I might not be familiar with. And again, save them to my LingQ account and my vocabulary list. Books in the public domain, great resources. They might be a little tricky to read via, as Steve mentioned, an actual book, because the ability to look up words, you need a dictionary and you kind of have to pause. So for example, the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, if I find it online, I can import it into my LingQ account. Here's the Spanish version. And as I get used to the words and I go through this, my knowledge of the language will grow, eventually leading me to be able to read books, real books, later on. Again, that's a quick overview of how LingQ works. There are a lot of features, a lot of great things in the reader that are highly customizable. But essentially, again, it's an input-based language learning method. Lots of reading, lots of listening. Yeah, and again, we have 50 languages to choose from, well, 50 plus languages to choose from, and we're usually adding other languages throughout the year. That's a quick overview of how, oh, and I would finally like to mention, sorry, one thing is it's available on mobile, and this is what it looks like just on the mobile app itself. So you can learn anytime, anywhere. And that's it.
Could I just ask one little comment? I think one important feature, I think, is our whole approach to statistics, where the learner can track what they've done in the past since they started with the language, how many words they know, how many hours of listening they put in. So there's a lot of statistics, maintaining the streaks. These are some of the things that Duolingo has done such a good job with, and that is using statistics or gamification to keep the learner engaged. Also, there were some questions here about how we deal with Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc., how we are able to use that content at LingQ. Eric, maybe you might want to explain that. And then I might explain too how this works if you are a teacher using this in conjunction with ESL instruction, because those two questions popped up here.
Yeah, sure. Just bouncing off Steve's mention about statistics. Here are mine on the web, just for Japanese. We track reading, listening, links created. A link is essentially when you click on a word and save its meaning, you change the color from blue to yellow. Speaking and other statistics as well. For Netflix, this only works if a user has a Netflix account and these other, as well as Amazon Prime. I don't have a Netflix account, so I don't use this feature. But if you have a Netflix account, you can import the, I don't think I have an example here, but you can actually import the text. You cannot import the video itself. You can import the text and you can read along. So it's good actually if you're watching a documentary that's very text heavy, you can import that from your Netflix account and go through it on your in your link library.
Insofar as the question about using this together with ESL instruction, I think it's a supplement, and I think to the extent that a teacher can encourage learners to go away and listen and read content perhaps that was covered in class, even practice activities where the learner may not remember the words. All of that sort of supplemental interaction with the content that might have been covered in class is facilitated by the use of LingQ. It doesn't replace what the tutor does in the classroom, but it empowers. I mean, with libraries, we're talking about lifelong learning. We're talking about, autonomous. It may not be autonomous, but, learners taking the initiative to maintain their learning activities. So where that's in conjunction with a tutor, I think that's just makes it that much stronger. So it just empowers, I think, the ESL instruction. I don't know if that answers the question. I'd certainly be happy to answer in more detail.
And I know we are approaching our time, so if folks do have questions, please go ahead and pop them in the
Oh.
chat while Steve is answering Mark's question. But go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I interact with a tutor in, say, Persian or Arabic for an hour, that tutor, the system we have with tutors is the tutor has to produce a report with 10 or 15 or 20 of the phrases where I had difficulty. So I get that as a report. I look up those words that I had difficulty with, and I generate an automatic audio version of that. So I am able to refresh that lesson. So and I think it's up to the imagination of the teacher how they can take advantage of LingQ to, expand the effectiveness of their interaction with the student.
Fantastic. And to close us out, let's quickly speak to Mark's question about families that want to pass on a language.
So, if you don't have the language, like Mark, you don't have Japanese at home because your wife was born in Canada, presumably. I don't know. Maybe she does speak.
So she's fluent.
Okay. So I have a very good friend who lives in Montreal, and he is Taiwanese. His wife is Japanese. His parents were also mixed Japanese and Chinese, and he has a Spanish nanny. And and the kids go to school in French in Montreal, and they watch English television. So he has this thing, one person, one language. So he's got his kids speaking 5 languages. It depends on the age of the kids. It depends on, obviously if your wife can speak to the kids in Japanese, if the kids are interested in, television programs or whatever from Japan, it's a matter of interacting with media in that language or interacting with people in that language. And at some point, if the child or the parent are so motivated, like you could work on Japanese using LingQ, your child might want to work on Japanese using LingQ at a certain point. I don't know how old your child is. So yeah.
5 and 10.
Pardon?
5 and 10.
5 and 10. Yeah. So a little early for LingQ, but it's more, I think if your wife is speaking to them in Japanese, that's a very good start.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, it's going to be up to what they want to do. based on my experience, if they want to learn, they will learn. If they don't want to learn, you can't force them. To be very blunt.
Yeah, I was thinking, just the 10-year-old, he's starting to use the computer quite a bit more. He can read comfortably. He watches like, anime, but it is translated into English. So like Captain Tsubasa, it's a soccer manga show on Netflix. But I was thinking even maybe if you started importing the actual Japanese version of that, perhaps.
10 might be a little early.
Yeah.
Depends on the level of motivation. I'm not I know we have had 12-year-olds on Link. I'm not sure we've ever had a 10-year-old, but possible.
All right. Well,
But I do love that, recognizing like if you said sit down and study Japanese to your 10-year-old, no dice, no dice, not happening. But if you were like, hey, did you know you can make it easier to listen to this cool show that you like, in without having it to be, having to hear it dubbed, now all of a sudden maybe I want to. So
Yeah.
exactly,
a great
exactly. Yeah, you think
thank
after, even 20 years of being with my wife, I should have learned Japanese by now, but and I've traveled to 60 countries, so I try to tell my kids it's the biggest regret of my life not having learned a second language yet.
I
So
like the word yet. I like the word yet. There are no excuses.
exactly. I'd just like to just note if anybody would like to take a trial of Link, they can send us a note at link LANGQ at learnersengage.com, or they can scan this QR code. But I'd really like to, thank both Steve and Audrey for taking time out today to and Eric for hosting the session and working with Learners Engaged on bringing Link to libraries. We're super excited about this, and we believe it's going to be a really impactful e-resource for libraries and for communities, for newcomers, and all around language learners. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Enjoyed it.
hosting.
everyone.
Nice meeting you, Audrey and Mark,
Have a
and
wonderful day
everyone.
ahead and a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye now.
Wonderful.